Hi, I'm Susan Audino. Welcome to LIMS for the Cannabis Laboratory, actually the cannabis industry from seed to sale. Of course, it includes the laboratory. Thank you for being here today. I look forward to sharing some really great information with you about LIMS, cloud LIMS in particular. It's a dynamic system. It's a wonderful approach and a wonderful addition to the industry. So my only regret is that we're not here in person, and I'm trusting everybody is well and healthy and safe. And with that, I will get started. So what exactly is seed to sale software? Well, for lack of anything more substantive, it really is seed to sale accounting. It's a tracking ability that tracks the entire life of the cannabis product, from the time it's grown all the way to the time it's sold to the customers. And who knows, in the future it could also include the degradation or the final disposition of that product as it is trashed. So why bother with the seed to sale software? I think that it is extremely helpful to any kind of a cannabis business to manage the inventory and comply with a lot of the state and local regulatory requirements and guidelines. So as you know, the cannabis industry is not exactly straightforward. It is not always easy, and sometimes there are competing processes in place. So what the software is going to allow you to do is to manage all of that with a little less anxiety, greater ease, and more accountability. So there are a lot of features that are involved in all of this, and ultimately you can pick and choose which features you like. So what we're going to talk about today are some of those features, some of the retail processes and software that's available to you that will likely help you in your piece of the industry. So let's start off with, what are the stages of the seed to sale life cycle? Obviously, I think it begins with cultivation, and then we are harvesting, and then we are testing that. And of course, transportation. And transportation actually happens in a couple of places here. In many states, it happens between harvest and testing. And in other places, then it also includes testing and then transportation and then point of sale. Ultimately, the patients have access to this, and patient identification and verification. And then finally, it ends up in a real-time data portal. So this is a very broad overview of what seed to sale tracking is, and it's there to ensure compliance and ultimately consumer safety. Why is this important to us? Well, I think first and foremost, many of the regulators want to know what's going on with the cannabis product, particularly in that we're still living in a federal prohibition of the substance. And so it provides an opportunity for central control and monitoring. It also provides a single database, one database that you can go into and look at what's happening with that particular product. So we have cultivators who can pop in, we have processors who can pop in, testing laboratories, dispensaries. You can all just kind of pop in and see what's happening with that product and how it's affected your particular component of this industry, wherever your services lie. When we put all of those pieces together, we end up with a comprehensive history and timeline for all things that have happened to that cannabis product, or the cannabis that's been produced for the sale and ultimate consumption by the public. So it really is a great way to track all of this. And state regulators are looking for this trackability. They want to know what's going on with this product. And so, in addition to that, there's also opportunity for each individual component. So the cultivator, the processor, the consumer, to know what's happening with that product. Again, businesses need the software that's going to offer a nice portal to its consumer, its customer, or its client, whether it's a cultivator or a manufacturer or perhaps testing location. Gives everybody an opportunity to share the results, and we are gaining in efficiency when we do this. So we don't have to go around and look for previous testing or previous use and figure out where all of those pieces fall. It's a nice, great, comprehensive system. For laboratories, it allows the laboratory to track what's going on in their labs, in their facilities, what's happened to their samples, how have they tested, what are those test results, and then they can automatically upload to the third-party regulatory database like Metric or Leaf or BioTrack. These are all third-party databases that are facilitated by various state regulators, and this is where customers will get the results of testing results. It's where laboratories have to deliver their test results to their customers. So this provides an interface between the laboratory, for example, and Metric, or laboratory and Leaf, or the cultivator and Leaf. You kind of get that now. We're also tracking the life cycle of the products, again, from planting, that cultivation part, all the way up to when the product is sold. This provides the manager of the business to look at the supply chain from the business perspective and ensure that their practices and processes are optimized. Again, it's a comprehensive picture of what's happening, and we can isolate the information that we need for each individual business or opportunity and maximize our business plan. With respect to the cultivators, they can forecast the yield. We can look at tracking the genealogy of a plant or selection of plants. It's essentially built for growers here, and it gives everybody an opportunity to analyze those results, again, in a more comprehensive or complete manner. So very, very utilitarian function here for cultivators. Can you imagine having an opportunity to create your cultivation plan, your scheme, your plants, your seeds, and understand what's happening on a long-term basis? Well, LIMS gives you that opportunity to do that. With respect to seed-to-sale tracking, again, it addresses the needs of the cannabis labs, the testing labs, in responding to both the state and local governments. And with respect to hemp, it also brings in the federal government. As we know, hemp is regulated by the USDA, and certainly this would be incorporated in that. With respect to the cannabis testing in particular, my goodness, as we know, many cannabis laboratories are required to be ISO 17025 accredited. Well, a lot of this speaks to some of that, so maybe this will sound familiar to you. In the cannabis laboratory, we need to manage QC samples and their results. And remember that quality control samples are there to ensure that the results of our testing are adequate, correct, consistent, and that they are ready to be released to the customer. We can't release any data unless we know that our system of analysis on that particular day for that particular batch has been successful, and QC is sort of the gatepost for that. We also have document control requirements. So there are many documents that exist in a laboratory, everything from working instructions to standard operating procedures to instrument manufacturer requirements for maintaining instruments. There are many documents. It can run into the hundreds or be down into 10 or 20 documents. But ultimately, no laboratory can function without a series of documents to support the quality management system. Very easily, these documents get a little out of control, quite honestly. So either they're updated or we have new staff coming in and we have to make sure that everybody is aware of what's going on. when documents are issued or when they're updated. So very often in a non-LIMS environment, we see a flurry of paper all over the lab. LIMS can also help the testing lab with staff training. So staff training, again, happens every day all over the place, and we need records of all of that. So LIMS can not only manage those records, but they can also help us to identify the training needs that are upcoming and current. And so, again, many applications with that. We have chain of custody results. So chain of custody for many labs begins at the cultivation facility where the laboratory has to go out and perform the sampling. Then they bring that sample back to the laboratory, and then the laboratory tests the sample. In other cases, the labs are not required to do that testing, or are not required to do that sampling, and they only test the sample that the customer delivers at the laboratory. So there's a lot that goes on with that chain of custody. Part of it involves a contract. Part of it involves an agreement with a customer or an agreement between the lab and the customer to perform specific work. So there's a lot that goes on, and that chain of custody is necessary for continuity of services as well as for defensibility, legal defensibility. The lab is fairly not able to perform work on a customer sample unless we know the history of that sample. Instrument calibration and maintenance can also be tracked and kept up to current speed with LIMS. And again, we're coming full circle here to the QC in validating test results. We're coming back to what processes do we have in place in the laboratory to empirically justify the data that we are producing, that we are ultimately sending back out to the laboratory, to the customer, the laboratory's customers. So that validation process can be very complex, and it can be somewhat circuitous at times, quite frankly. There's a lot that goes on with that, and a lot of times laboratories are encumbered by hiring extra personnel to check test results and validating the individual results before they go out. So there's a lot that goes into running a laboratory and generating a test result. And LIMS here can certainly help the laboratory on any number of these, in any number of these places and on any number of levels. So let's talk about where some of this is brought up in 17025, and in particular, the 2017 revision. Well, QC samples and their results is in response to ISO 17025, clause number 7.7, right? 8.3 is the area or the clause that specifies document control, that no documents can be used or issued unless they have been authorized, are appropriate, and that all old documents have been removed from places of use. So not only is the laboratory responsible for updating documents when they're necessary, so updating an SOP, they also have to make sure that the previous revisions have been removed from the laboratory. When we're working with paper documents, this becomes a very challenging task. And in order to be compliant with section 8.3 of 17025, we need something to ensure that our documents are very well controlled, that people have only the documents that they need to perform their jobs. Section 6.2, or clause 6.2 of ISO 17025 is specific to staff training. There are many requirements for staff training in this new revision of the standard, and it's quite honestly really been bumped up from the previous revision, ISO revision. So a lot goes into staff training. It's not just about hiring people and training them to perform their job. It's also making sure that they are competent and proficient to perform anything, any function that affects that test result, anything that goes into the performance of testing. It also requires staff training and authorization to be monitored on an ongoing basis. So not only are we training new people, we are ensuring that they're still competent some period of time later. Could be months later, a year later, 2 years later. But that monitoring has to show up in records. And 6.2 is the direction for all of that. And LIMS certainly makes short work of that in terms of scheduling and follow through. 7.4 of the standard includes chain of custody. It includes the fact that all test items must be handled appropriately, and that we have to understand the history of that sample. When did we first put our hands on it? When did we get it into the lab? What did we do to it? So 7.4 ensures that the laboratory can defend and has justification for handling all test materials appropriately. Chain of custody is certainly part of that. Clause 6.4 of the standard calls out the instrument calibration and maintenance. So again, we, in order to do good work in the laboratory, need to ensure that our instruments are working properly, that they are properly maintained and calibrated. In a non-LIMS environment, this again becomes a paper nightmare. So bringing it all together here through Cloud LIMS, we're able to assimilate and spend more time looking at the bigger picture of what's happening in our laboratory rather than chasing paper. And finally, ensuring test results. We're really talking about section 7.8 of the standard. There are many requirements that go into reporting a test result and ensuring that what goes on the COA is complete, it's accurate, and that it's defensible. And so LIMS is able to bring together all of these elements and pretty much automate most of that for us. It certainly does improve our opportunity in the laboratory to spend our time in the laboratory looking at data and not necessarily checking all of the boxes before we issue the COA. With proper programming and vetting, Cloud LIMS will take care of a good number of these responsibilities for us that are, again, requirements of 17025. So how does it manage QC test results? Well, one way that it manages this is to have an automatic upload of the QC results, and we flag it with error bars or confidence intervals. And so LIMS will tell us when we are outside that comfort zone or outside that confidence zone where we need to then stop the issuance of the test result and back up and try to understand what's going on. And this is an enormous help in a laboratory, because if the LIMS is evaluating the data for us, we can, again, take personnel away and improve the laboratory efficiency. Now, it doesn't mean laboratory personnel are exonerated from dealing with any kind of QC work. That's certainly not true. But LIMS will give us the opportunity to flag the result, and then the personnel, our chemists, our scientists can then back up and understand where the breakdown happened. So again, when we look at setting up Cloud LIMS with the specification limits that we need, we can build in decision rules, and it will automate that system for us. It will allow us to more easily evaluate quality control and the release of test data. As it's doing this, all of the QC data are ending up in a plot. So we need to be able to analyze data in a way that we can detect trends. Again, this is another ISO 17025 requirement. And by this automated plotting, again, we set our own confidence limits and our warning limits. So we can say, well, if we get data that's right around here on a line, then we're still going to pass the test result, but we want to look a little more closely in this. And if something is beyond that and is actually outside a specification zone, then we need to back up completely. So this trend analysis is an awesome tool. Why are we plotting the trend at all? Not only is it giving us indication of pass or fail of our QC, but ideally what it's doing is setting up the framework for us to project and forecast a problem before it becomes a problem. If we notice that our QC continually trend upward or downward, maybe there's an indication there that something has gone awry, and it will give us an opportunity to back up and look at what could potentially be happening before it goes out of compliance. So trend analysis is hugely important in the laboratory, and Cloud LIMS is making that a very accessible and easily used feature. Document control manages documents. We're tracking that revision history. We're assigning and accessing privileges to the staff based on their roles. Not every staff person needs to have access to every document that exists in the laboratory. If we have somebody who's just doing field sampling, and so his or her role is only to go out to the field and do that sampling, he or she doesn't necessarily need to know how to clean an ICP-MS. So having access to the maintenance requirements for the ICP really is not necessary for that person. So this gives us an opportunity to make available the documents that people need to perform their jobs. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot that goes into document control. It's not only issuing a new document, but it is also making sure that people have access to the document that they need and that all previous documents have been redacted. This gives us an opportunity to streamline everything and have assurance and provide a record of when people are reading the documents so we know who's read what. We also have a record of what the most current document is. It makes document control a whole lot easier than manual manipulation. Staff training and competency. As I mentioned, training is a really huge feature in 17025. And I don't know about most laboratories or your laboratory, but many laboratories are undergoing a rapid turnover in staffing. So there are a lot of people coming in, a lot of people going out, and also laboratories are growing. So what may have started with 5 or 6 analysts or chemists now may have 40 or 50 chemists, 2 years out. So staff training always becomes a challenge. It could be a very big problem for many laboratories, not just in initial training, but also in that monitoring. Remember that nobody can perform any work on a sample, on a customer sample, unless he or she is trained and is determined competent and is authorized to perform very specific work. That work affects every function in the laboratory, from field sampling to preparing a sample to analyzing the result to issuing a COA. Everything needs a demonstration or some clarification on competency and monitoring of that competency. These records have to be available. If they are not available, or if there is no record of training and competency, then it didn't happen. What Cloud LIMS does is gives us an opportunity to streamline all of that. It is that management system for the staff training, so we can, in a moment's notice, know who's competent, who needs training, where are we, and can we lock out a person from performing a particular method until he or she has been trained and authorized to perform this very specific function. Again, a great tool for managing training and competency, which is not a trivial matter in any laboratory. Chain of custody, from sample collection to accessioning to disposal. Everything that sample has gone through needs to be accounted for. This is part of the chain of custody. Who is the customer? When did we get that sample? Did we go and pick it up? Was it dropped off at the laboratory? How much of that sample did we use for testing? How much of it was disposed? Where did we dispose it? How did we dispose it? These are all elements that regulatory bodies expect from a laboratory. And LIMS, Cloud LIMS, gives us that chain of custody, accessibility, and trackability from the moment we see it to the moment we get rid of it. It's a long chain, and being able to track every event in that chain is essential to the functioning of the laboratory. Overall workflow management. As we know, laboratories are not simple processes. We don't say pick up this paper and go analyze the sample. There are workflows involved. There could be rush samples involved. There could be retest samples. It could be a QC sample failure. We have processes that are all governed under the quality management system. Of that is quality assurance. Of that, also under that quality management system, is quality control. All of this needs to be managed, this entire workflow. Who's going to be doing the sample preparation on customer A sample? Who's going to be performing the analytical work? Who's going to analyze the data? Where is that data being analyzed? How is it being uploaded to a COA? Who's checking that COA? How is it being released to the third-party database? There's just a huge amount of work and steps that we don't normally think about that go into analyzing a test sample. So this entire workflow is captured by Cloud LIMS. Again, it is tailor-made. So the parameters around all of this are up to the needs of the laboratory. Maybe your workflow only has 5 steps. Maybe the lab across the street has 25 steps. We can modify this to meet your needs. Instrument calibration and maintenance. All instruments need to be qualified before they are used. So as soon as an instrument is put into service or brought into a laboratory, it needs to be qualified. We need to make sure that it's qualified. We need to ensure that all equipment, balances, pipettes, thermometers, all of these things are calibrated and verified. So calibration is generally performed by an external company, a 17025 calibration company. Verifications are usually performed in-house. And the verification is assurance that the piece of equipment is still operating within its boundaries, within its calibration boundaries. So for example, if we get a balance calibrated, and then we're getting it calibrated every year, we still check it pretty much every day, if not every day, using a set of calibrated check weights to make sure that the balance is operating in that appropriate range for us. Again, a lot of data. Same thing with thermometers. So if we have a refrigerator or a freezer where we're storing stuff, we need to ensure that the environmental conditions are being met. So this gives us that opportunity to capture that data. We also have instrument maintenance. I mentioned earlier ICP. We have ICPs, we have GCs, we have LCs, HPLCs. We have a lot of really heavy-duty instrumentation available in the laboratory, and we need to ensure that it's being maintained appropriately and by competent staff. So we need an opportunity to capture all of this data. We need to manage this other workflow. This is just the workflow within the workflow, the instrument calibration and maintenance. Not only what is on the schedule, was it performed correctly by competent personnel. All of this needs to be captured in order to be compliant with 17025. And also, quite frankly, for the laboratories that are not 17025 accredited, this helps you in your laboratory because you need to make sure that your instruments are working. What confidence can your results have for your customers if you're not using qualified instrumentation, and be able to defend that with these records? So Cloud LIMS gives you that opportunity, gives you the opportunity to manage this other micro workflow within the larger workflow of the laboratory. Ensuring test results. So we can send out multiple test results for review and verification and validation and approval before the COA is actually released to the customers. So again, this is assimilating all of the data that's been brought into the LIMS, right? When I think about a LIMS, I think of a black box, and I think of tons of inputs, and then the output is the COA. So we look at all of the input. We look at, did qualified people run the method? What method was run? What documents did they use? Who was trained and authorized? Which instruments did we use? What data do we get? And who is evaluating that data? We check through all of that before the final output goes out to the customer, and we know that as the COA. So we're ensuring the test results, and we're consolidating all of those individual inputs into one centralized location. So Cloud LIMS is bringing in all of the workflows into this one area that the qualified person, maybe it's your CSO, maybe it's your lab director, doesn't really matter who that person is, as long as he or she is qualified, can now look at all of the individual inputs and give that final approval to push out that data onto that COA that is headed for the customer. So we have an opportunity here to, again, bring in all of those workflows into something that's very easily managed. Generating the COA becomes a very seamless method and practice for the laboratory. Again, this is set up for your specific laboratory. We put in your specifications. We can upload your decision rules. And Cloud LIMS will say, you know what, we may be the driver behind the COA, but this is your COA. The COA speaks to you, speaks to your laboratory. We want to make it as easy for you as possible to get this information out that is important for your customer. So we're directing the COA, we're directing LIMS to generate the COA only on the information, on the data that is important to you and to your customer. And it does it very easily. We don't have to deal with PDFs. We don't have to deal with Excel sheets. We don't have to deal with so much that we've been dealing with over the years. Cloud LIMS really makes it easy. It brings it all to one place, not only to push it out as a COA, but also to review it all. And it makes reading it a whole lot easier on the other end. I have been with some customers who've received the COA and they just think it's dynamite because whatever they need is there. So we have the portal. How does it all work? Well, we have a client portal. So we can download, upload the COAs as well as invoices. So this goes beyond where some other LIMS stop at the COA. We can now use the Cloud LIMS to generate the invoices. Again, the portal becomes a very easy to manage tool, consolidated tool for your customers. And also, it's helping your business decisions. It's helping you manage your business operations. You know who got what and when they were aware of their invoice. We also have a read-only audit trail. So this becomes incredibly important with ISO 17025 and even beyond that, for the overall defensibility of the lab. We want things to be auditable. We want things to be defensible. We want to know what's going on when changes are made to the LIMS, to our specification limits, when we're updating stuff. We need to maintain an audit trail of that. 17025 requires an audit trail anytime we've made any changes to LIMS. Cloud LIMS makes that very easy. There's a date and time stamp, invisible read-only audit trail that is available whenever an update is made. Crucial for the defensibility if any of the laboratory's activities are called into question on a legal end, and crucial for defending this to your ISO 17025 assessor. Instrument and software integration. Again, this is Cloud LIMS is bringing it all together for us. It is managing a workflow within the bigger workflow. So it's bringing together the instrument. And as we know, instruments are driven by software, right? We have software drivers. So we are managing those software drivers, and when that software is updated, bringing it all together so that we can now minimize the turnaround time. We are going to be able to post results directly into that seed to sale software, such as Metric and Leaf and BioTrack THC. All of this is enhancing the laboratory's efficiency and defensibility. I keep coming back to the word defensibility. And I think that we all agree that we're seeing more and more lawsuits come up, or more labs closing down because of failure to comply with certain requirements and regulations. Some of that may be about staff competence or laboratory competence, and maybe some of it is about record management and the integration and the compilation of all of the data that goes into this. Maybe they didn't have that. I honestly don't know. But when I think about the future of our industry, I see our future seeing more laboratory shutdown and more laboratory failure. So we need this integration. We need this integration process in the laboratory to make sure that all that we're doing is transparent, it's available, it's defensible. We need this defensibility. Benefits of deploying a cannabis LIMS, and in particular our cloud LIMS. We're going to improve our defensiveness and verification of test result accuracy. We are most definitely going to improve our productivity. Quality has many more checks and balances in place that are a little more automated and stop checks so that we can't go past bar A if we haven't met those requirements. And all of this is going to lead to lower costs, lower business costs, better business management, and better allocation of resources. Quality management system overrides everything, and this brings it all together for us. At the end of the day, we end up with better defensibility, better test results, better quality, and lower costs. That efficiency is paramount to the success of the laboratory. Seed sale software benefits for manufacturers and processors. We have the conversion tracking. We have transactional reports. Who's doing what? Who's getting what? Who's buying what? What is the process of all of that? What's happening? And what about the transport manifests? Again, we have 2 points of transport. One is, in many cases, but not all, the laboratory going to the cultivation facility to pick up the sample in the first place. And so we have transport manifest number 1 to the laboratory, but always we have transport manifest from the facility to the dispensary. Being able to justify and account for the transportation and the actions and the behavior of that product are essential for regulatory bodies, as well as for the economy of the product for the distributor, right? You want to know what's going on. Where has it gone? So Cloud LIMS gives us that option, gives us that opportunity to bring it all together. For the retailers, we know what's going on. We can look at purchase limits. We look at managing the overall customer base. We have an automated data entry. We know who's buying what. We know where things are going, how long things are sitting on the shelf or not sitting on the shelf. We can also use Cloud LIMS to automate a discount program or a loyalty program. We can, again, bring all of this into an easy reporting system and, again, a more efficient way to understand the business of retail. So we have all of this in one place. But how do you choose the right LIMS partner? That's always the biggest question, isn't it? Here's the checklist. I'm not going to read through everything on this checklist. It's here for you. But you want to make sure that you can do everything that we've talked about in the last 40 minutes or so, that you can maintain the chain of custody, that you know who touched that sample, where it went, how it got there, when did it get there, who then received it, who did what to that sample in a testing lab. What were those results? Who has access to those results? Oh, and by the way, were those results validated and checked before they were released? Are they good results? Can we manage all of this together as independent workflows and then as the overall workflow? Not all LIMS can do this. Cloud LIMS can do this for you, but I encourage you to go out and ask this big question. How are you going to choose your partner? I think we have, in the last 40 minutes, certainly demonstrated the benefit, the essential benefit of having LIMS in the laboratory. So now the next question is, how are you going to choose the right one for you? And is your LIMS partner able to provide a tailor-made output for you or tailor-made management workflow for you? Those are the big questions that you should be asking yourselves. And I would like to say thank you very much for being here today. This has certainly been a pleasure to talk about LIMS and to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is laboratory science. I encourage you to reach out to folks at Cloud LIMS for more information, or if you'd like, again, a little more information from me, if I can help in any way, here's my contact information, and I invite you to contact me by email or by phone. And with that, I hope you are well. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and that it added value to your business model and your business decisions. I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.